Welcome back to the channel. So here we are in my kitchen, and we're in the process of making a new batch of pest-resistant Bokashi bran, or in this case, Bokashi Flakes. I'm going to give you a close-up of this coffee chaff. This is the outer husk of a coffee cherry or a coffee bean. And this comes off in the roasting process. It's extremely light and fluffy, very lightweight. And this is what I'm planning to use now in place of the wheat bran that I used a year and a half or so ago when I made my first batch of Bokashi bran. So the problem that I had with that was that grain mites got into that, and it became very unappealing to use that. So I like to use this instead. So I have my materials already set out. I'll go ahead and show those to you. Over there, I've got 39 cups of the coffee chaff measured out from this tote here that I've been pulling it from. And then I also have, in this mason jar, I have some milk that I inoculated with some week-old rice wash. And so you can see that it's separated into curds and whey. Curds at the top and the whey at the bottom. And so that whey is actually what I'm going to use. That actually is going to contain the Lactobacillus, lactic acid bacteria that we want to use to inoculate all of this coffee chaff here. And then in the jar, next to the mason jar, I have a jar of molasses, and I'm going to mix that with some warm water to kind of feed the bacteria that are in the whey, to kind of give them a little bit of a boost so that they have something to eat when they are mixed into this coffee chaff. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and measure out one more cup of coffee chaff just so that you can see what I've been doing. I saved the last cup for this video so that you didn't have to watch me measure out 40 cups of coffee chaff. But basically my ratio that I plan to use is 40 cups of coffee chaff to 3 cups of water, which is warming on the stove, to 1 tablespoon of molasses to 1 tablespoon of whey. And I'm going to demonstrate all of that in front of you so that you can see it. But without further ado, let me measure out that last cup of coffee chaff. This is the 40th cup of coffee chaff. Just going to shake it off so that it's about even, about level. So that is 40 cups of coffee chaff. As I mentioned, out of view, I have 3 cups of water in here. It's non-chlorinated water. That's very important so that it does not kill off the lactic acid bacteria. So I warmed up the water because it makes it easier to dissolve the molasses into the water. So I will go ahead and do that. I'm going to test it, make sure that it's not too warm. It actually feels a little bit too warm, which is not good. I don't want it to be too hot. So while I let that cool, I am going to measure out my 1 tablespoon of molasses. And this is the brand that I use. It's unsulfured molasses. So let's go ahead and measure that out. One tablespoon. And so there we are. Just gonna mix that in. The warm water helps it to dissolve. So I'm just gonna run that back and forth a few times, make sure that I get off as much of the molasses as possible. And it looks pretty clean, so I think we're about good on that. And you can see that the molasses has really dissolved in there. So that's good. Alrighty. Let's put our lid back on those molasses. We'll move those out of the picture for now. All right, so now we've got 3 cups of water. So we know it contains molasses. I would use some ice cubes to thaw this a little, or to bring the temperature down a little bit, but I don't want to risk adding chlorine. So I'm just going to use my finger again as a little test. All right, it doesn't feel overly warm, so I think that's going to be just fine. We don't want to have we don't want the temperature to be too warm for the bacteria. And so I'm going to go ahead and use this turkey baster. We're looking for 15 mLs. 15 milliliters, 1 tablespoon rather, of this whey. So let me bring it closer so that you can see. I'm actually going to push the baster down. All right, and let's get 15. All right, I've got 15. All right, that's 15 milliliters of the whey. I'm gonna screw my lid back on there. It's not fully tight so that it can breathe a little bit. So now that we have the warm water mixed with the molasses and mixed with the whey, I'm just gonna swirl that around a little bit. And then, without further ado, we're going to pour that into the coffee chaff. So let's go ahead and do that. We're just going to pour it into the coffee chaff. This was the purpose of the previous video that I did, determining the saturation point of the coffee chaff. And And this is about what we figured would be enough liquid to fully saturate the coffee chaff. So, just gonna go ahead and mix this around so that all of the coffee chaff is fully saturated with this liquid. There's quite a bit of it, just of the liquid just sitting in the bottom, and so you really have to work the liquid into the chaff. The chaff is somewhat hydrophobic, meaning that it doesn't necessarily readily absorb water or liquids unless those liquids are worked into the chaff. So we are just going to keep mixing until the chaff has taken on the liquid. Again, the purpose is to inoculate this chaff with the lactic acid bacteria so that it can then be used as a medium through a substrate of sorts, an inoculated substrate that we can use to ferment our food scraps that we then feed to worms and black soldier fly larvae, etc. This was much easier to do with the wheat bran. The wheat bran readily absorbed the liquid, and it was just an overall easy process. So I would recommend the wheat bran if you have the ability to do that, but you do have to be careful for grain mites. They're going to be attracted to the wheat bran, and from what I've heard, they can be a real problem if they spread beyond your bokashi. So that was not a risk that I really wanted to take, so I've gone ahead and we're trying this method now. As you can see as well, the bran, the coffee chaff really bulks up and loses all, the volume shrinks as it gets moist. But we're now at a place where I believe most of the chaff is now moist. We're going to get the pieces on the bottom and make sure that they are saturated. Turn this over very well. And it looks like it's about done. Now the volume has really, like I mentioned, has really come down. And that's for better and for worse. I'm hoping that when the bran dry, or when the chaff dries, that the volume, or the flakes will break out again, will break up again, because that will allow me to, it'll allow it to go further, as opposed to me just using it one clump like this when I'm trying to inoculate food scraps. I'd prefer to use just a few flakes. But again, we'll see how well that goes. I don't know how well it's going to go. But thankfully, I do have a great abundance of coffee chaff. As you can tell, look at this. This is an entire bin full of coffee chaff. So if it came to it and I needed to make more, it wouldn't be a problem as far as the supply of coffee chaff. Now, this part we've gone ahead and we've inoculated the coffee chaff with this Lactobacillus containing whey. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and we're going to put it in a bag. We grab the bag. We're going to put it in this trash bag and we're going to basically ferment it for 2 weeks. So I'm going to put it in a dark place at about room temperature for 2 weeks. And that's going to allow the Lactobacillus to fully colonize this chaff. So we're just going to take all of this again and put it in this bag. I'm going to tie off the bag because we're hoping for anaerobic conditions. That means lacking oxygen. So the way to do that, of course, is to put it in the bag and tie it off. Put it in the dark room temperature place for about 2 weeks, and then we'll come back. And we should be able to tell by the smell that the process is done. It will have what some people would refer to as a yeasty smell, or a fermented smell, or a bit of a sour, pickled smell. But all of those are signs that the fermentation process is taking place, that the Lactobacillus is metabolizing well, is multiplying in the environment. That's all of the chaff, just about. I feel like it's decently moist. Again, it doesn't hold water super well, but it's moist enough, I think. So there it is in the bag. Like I mentioned, we're going to tie it off and then put it in a dark room temperature for about 2 weeks. So really looking forward to that. And then I will finally have hopefully my new pest-resistant batch of Bokashi flakes. Thank you so much for watching. If there's any other substrate that you've used that you really enjoy for your Bokashi substrate, whether that's bran, I've heard of people using newspaper, of all kinds of other things, feel free to include those in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you see anything that you think I could do differently, please also include that. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.